Well, hello again and welcome to our fifth installment of our G20 coverage. With just 114 days to go before the G20 Leaders Summit in November, we turn our attention to a crisis that cuts across borders, weakens institutions and deepens inequality: corruption. Well, according to the World Bank, corruption and related crimes cost South Africa up to 10% of its GDP annually. That's billions of rand lost to criminal networks, kickbacks, and procurement abuse. On the global stage, corruption bleeds 5% of global GDP, a mind-bending $2.6 trillion lost each year. For the next half hour, we zoom into the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group, chaired by Advocate Andy Mutib, head of South Africa's Special Investigating Unit. Well, his task is steep: to lead the global fight against corruption while still grappling with some of the same challenges here at home. Well, corruption is an evolving global threat that does more damage to undermine development, and it is a key cause of declining democracy, lack of trust in public institutions, and likely to incite social instability. Tackling corruption requires a comprehensive, collaborative, and practical approach by all countries. The G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group has been having technical meetings basically to strategize and to enhance anti-corruption tools. To understand more on this, SABC News specialist researcher Velemseni Mtiane filed this report for us. Let's watch.
There are different global challenges and crises which countries find it difficult to navigate, especially for many developing countries. There is corruption. Corruption thrives where there is non-consequential disregard of rules, regulations, and lack of good governance.
What we are looking for is ethical leadership, strong leadership, by the way, because so many times when corruption is uncovered and civil society uncovers it, the people that are involved and implicated get let off the hook, get a slap on the wrist, and allowed to sometimes resign, and then nothing happens. You know, the book should be thrown at them. And ethical leadership is about holding people to account meaningfully, so that you can build trust in the people and say, okay, now we see you taking action, but it doesn't happen. And very often what we see, it's because the people who've been found wanting, who were put in those positions by senior leadership in government.
Corruption persists in all countries and it manifests in different ways, from bribes, kickbacks, and grand theft of public resources. With advances in technology, corruption has increasingly become a transnational challenge without respect for borders, as money can now move in and out easily out of countries to hide illicit gains. At the center of this fight is whistleblowing, which is an important tool in fighting corruption. The G20 countries are expected to share strategies, international best practice measures in combating corruption.
This is a platform where we are able to learn from the other G20 countries how they are doing what we are doing, but also they are able to learn from us on what we are doing. Therefore, these agreements that we enter into in such discussions help us to say, how do we take things further? For an example, we are dealing with the issue of the problem of whistleblowers and how to protect them. And they will be able to say, in our country, this is how we go about it. And then we'll look at that and then see how we can make it our own and look at the legislations around what we're doing. And it comes at the right time when we are busy with the legislation to protect the whistleblowers. But that is how it is helpful to us, and we are learning a lot from especially the developed countries.
Improving asset recovery forms one of the fundamental discussions in G20. This is particularly important issue for many developing countries where high-level corruption has resulted in a plundering of government funds which are essential for the reconstruction and rehabilitation of societies under new governments.
Illegally gained assets, we are able to recover them and invest those money back into our economy. There's been some challenges, as I said, that countries have their own what we call legislative frameworks, but this working group, which is anti-corruption, has to come up with policies and to come up with some ways as to how we can improve on recovering all those assets, even if there are no treaties between those two countries. That's what this summit should come up with.
Corruption undermines the trust and confidence that the citizens have for their leaders and institutions. Velemseni Mtiane, SABC News.
All right, well, let's take this further and unpack how extensive corruption is on a global scale with our specialist researcher, Velemseni Mtiane. Veli, a very good afternoon to you. So, of course, you've been paying attention to this. And I want to talk about the anti-corruption working groups. Of course, they are targeting a number of key issues. But let's focus and zone in on 4 critical ones.
Well, good afternoon to you, Unati, and good afternoon to the viewers at home. Yes, the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group has been doing some stellar work in terms of technical planning and discussions and that have been embarking on in the past couple of months. And I think if we are to look into the graphic that is going to give us their key 4 priorities there, if we look at the promotion of the transparency, integrity, and accountability in the public sector. Unati, we all know that when it comes to the public sector, that's especially in the procurement side of the public sector, that's where there is a lot of weakness and there's a lot of vulnerability in terms of corruption. And also they are looking in terms of increasing the efficiency of asset recovery measures. Unati, you know that sometimes when corruption is done, it goes across borders, and sometimes those critical resources or funds are taken to other countries, and it's difficult at times to bring them because of different legal frameworks that one has to adhere to, and also to enhance the inclusive participation of the public sector, the private sector, the civil society, and the academia. The issue of fighting corruption, it calls for everyone to be involved. And again, if we look in terms of enhancing the whistleblower protection, it's something that all the countries in the world are looking at, and it's part of the 4 key priorities that the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group is focusing on.
And that's a very important one. But let's focus on the asset recovery, particularly because of its complexity. What do the numbers look like there?
Sure. If we look at the numbers, they're going to show us in the screen. The numbers are very interesting. Let's look at first what this the Special Investigating Unit in South Africa has been doing. In the financial year 2023-2024, we're looking at about 8 billion rands that they were able to save in terms of their intervention measures. And also we're looking in terms of the tender corruption that has been exposed in the SOEs, the municipalities and the private sector, collusion at times, if we to recall into the construction of Kusile and Medupi. And then also we're looking at the illicit financial outflows, which cost them in about $50 billion.
And I mean, we're talking about the cost also of what corruption actually costs. When you look at South Africa, we talked about the GDP there, 5%. But when we look at it from a global scale, how is South Africa faring?
Sure. In terms of how we are being ranked, Unati, we'll see also again in our graphic, it will tell us that we are really not doing that well because we are ranked as about number, if the graph would...
let's actually pull up that 3rd graphic and just give a sense to our viewers of those numbers, which are at the moment quite shocking. I mean, it's something that we've been discussing too in terms of how South Africa is doing.
That's where we are, Unati. South Africa is ranked 7th in the world and 3rd in Africa when it comes to mafia-style criminal networks and organized crime syndicates. That's according to 2023 Global Organized Crime Index. And also the World Bank in 2023 said that South Africa, it cost about 10% of its GDP. You did mention this earlier. And also in 2022, the World Bank did indicate that about 2.6 trillion or about 5% of GDP is what the world is losing when it comes to corruption. Massive amounts of money that can move a needle when it comes to achieving the sustainable development goals.
And for our last point and topic and reference, something that is very close to many people, it's that perceived levels of public sector corruption. They are worrying. And there we have that graphic there. Speak to us about what we're seeing. How are we faring as South Africa in as far as the scoring is concerned?
Sure. We're not doing so well. If we look in terms of the perceived levels of public sector corruption, in terms of 100 being very clean, and then 0 being highly corrupt. South Africa, it ranks about number 42 when it comes to that. And then globally, out of 180 countries, we are sitting at number 82. So you could see that when it comes to the 100, which is the total score of ranking, South Africa is somewhere not doing too bad, not also not too good. And there's been no change when it comes to that. But instead, if you are looking at the numbers, you can see that we are not necessarily making much progress when it comes to achieving our objectives in terms of winning the fight against corruption. Perhaps it's time for the change of strategy.
Yeah, and I saw that it also sat somewhere around, in terms of the scoring, around 41. And when you look at 0 actually being, not so good. So quite staggering numbers. But Veli, thank you so much for unpacking all of that for us. Of course, we'll continue to speak around this. That was Velimseni Mtiane, the SABC News specialist researcher. Let's continue to this now. Corruption is attracting a lot of attention around the world. It is a universal problem for both the developing and developed nations. Although the specific forms and severity may vary, the fight against corruption is necessary in order to preserve the resources for development and for peace sustainability.
It's a fallacy to say that there is no corruption in the world. Corruption exists globally. However, the corruption in the West is what I call functional corruption, because despite corruption, things still happen. With us in Africa, it's dysfunctional because nothing happens. I will make an analogy between the functional and dysfunctional corruption. If in the West a person is given, an entity is given to build 10 schools, maybe they'll steal 2 and build 8. With us, with dysfunctional corruption is that nothing is built. People are given money and money disappears. So that's what we have, dysfunctional corruption. And until our government delivers to the people, this country is going to burn, because the youth is very impatient. They cannot stand the level of corruption. We can't stand. My generation also cannot stand the level of corruption, because it has had impact in terms of job creation to our children. And if we do not address this country will burn.
Well, let's continue to focus on those 3 key pressure points around today's topic and other matters under discussion at the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. Joining us now is a man leading both the national and international charge, Advocate Andy Mutib, head of the Special Investigating Unit and the chair of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. A very good afternoon to you, Advocate, and thank you so much for your time. I would imagine that your job is really a tough one, especially, during the country's G20 presidency, tackling corruption in such a way where there is good collaboration with the various countries, and especially courage. When you look at what we're talking about now in terms of just the kind of crisis we are in, when we speak about corruption, it cuts across borders, it weakens institutions, and it deepens inequality.
Correct. Thank you very much, Unati, for this interview, and obviously to really inform the public of what's happening in the G20 space. And I'm really glad that you gave the background that you did. It is well documented, the effects of corruption. Yeah. I totally agree with you around the effects. And in fact, we have accepted that this could actually be characterized as a crisis. And the reason why I say so is that when it's a crisis, it requires a certain specific responses globally. You may throw your mind back to 2007, 2008, when the world experienced financial crisis. There was a specific response by the globe globally, right? The governors of the Reserve Bank, ministers of finance met in a town called Basel to come up with a response, right? Now, another crisis was the COVID-19, just to mention a few. Yeah. How the world really responded to mitigate the risks. Now, if we treat corruption really as a crisis, it requires, business unusual responses. The public is really calling for that. For obvious reasons that you have mentioned, right? State institutions that are meant to deliver services for the public are weakened. The public services are undelivered. And what happens is the public that gets affected, right? Health, education, and all other social services, and so on. Now, that being the case, in the G20, we have really agreed that we need to step up. Now, as the presidency of the G20 South Africa, and in particular the chair of the anti-corruption working group, bearing all of this in mind, right? The impact, the losses, the poor rating, and all of that. We then said, from where we sit, the priorities that we have put forward will take us really a long way in turning the corner, right? The first one that you have already mentioned here, right? It's transparency, integrity, in the public sector, and we probably would extend that in the private sector as well, right? In the public sector particularly, because the investigations that we do really show losses emanating from the public service due to poor conduct, unethical conduct, ensuring that there's management overrides when it comes to supply chain management and so on. So when we deal with the integrity in that space, we believe we will see the changes. Now, the other one is the enhancing asset recovery measures, right? On the asset recovery measures, you have correctly captured that in many instances, when corrupt activities are conducted, you will see flows going outside of the country. Now, as the G20 anti-corruption working group, we actually spend a lot of time on how to enhance collaboration, tracing of assets when they have left the countries, and the mutual legal assistance strengthening. The mutual legal assistance really is under the United Nations Convention against Corruption, which most, if not all, of the G20 countries are signatories to. So we are really awake to the fact that we need to make sure that there is no refuge for those who committed corruption in any other jurisdiction.
And I'm glad you mentioned the word awake. In your opening remarks in one of the anti-corruption G20 summits, I believe it was in Brazil, your opening remark was quite powerful in that for the longest time, reactive approach of fighting corruption isn't working, it's failing. And one begs the question, why was it reactive to begin with? Surely we should be taking a proactive approach to this. One of the approaches that are proactive one should be taking, and one should think that many countries would take, is centering and focusing on whistleblowers and the effects of protecting whistleblowers.
Exactly.
I mean, we know that whistleblowers, and even as we heard in the Zondo Commission, they are very much integral in terms of being used as a tool to uncover corruption, but yet this is a tool that we are not using and we're not protecting. What's happening there? I mean, legislation is still in the pipeline. It's not even, at this point in time, it hasn't even been presented to Parliament. We know, of course, that that protective bill is still under review. Speak to us about the delays around that and what can we see, particularly as you head into that Leaders Summit in November, in terms of a fundamental, tangible declaration around the safety and the protection of whistleblowers.
No, thank you very much for that. Whistleblowers is one of the other critical topics that we are focusing at in the anti-corruption working group. In fact, it's the fourth priority of South Africa in terms of ensuring that there's improvements in the fight against corruption. We have accepted that the protection of whistleblowers is a key initiative. It's a key act that we need to show out there. There are measures in place at the moment to protect whistleblowers, but we agree that they can be improved because we've seen in many instances whistleblowers suffer prejudices, in some instances, even the extreme price of death, right? We are reminded of the likes of Babita Deokaran here. And on that one, just to give you, an example, that the immense input that Babita Deokaran's efforts has really given us as the Special Investigating Unit, and of course the Gauteng Department of Health, to uncover corruption that's happening in the Department of Health, particularly at the Tembisa Hospital. We have been investigating there, and her efforts has really been very helpful. We will be going out soon. We are just finalizing the investigation. In fact, I'll be meeting the investigating team soon. So what we are saying, to encourage other whistleblowers to come through, is that we should deliberately indicate that the measures for protection have been improved. So now, what are we doing as a country? The Department of Justice and Constitutional Development is leading this space. And the level of agency really has been acknowledged. Our minister has acknowledged that agency. And the president has also acknowledged that presidency, that agency. You would have seen that there was a report issued out by the president. Now, that's showing how
On
is
Monday,
it? Yes, how is it that we are, implementing the recommendation of the Zondo Commission? Part of that, drive is to improve the measures around whistleblower protection, and in fact, some of the practitioners or activists in the space of the whistleblower protection, they are even advocating that we should look at incentivizing. Over and above protection, we should look at incentivizing. The current legislation is not sufficient because at the moment, the Protected Disclosures Act focuses only on really employment prejudices. So now all of those activists and ourselves as well as government, we are saying the legislation has to be improved. And it should be part of the legislative program that is driven by the Department of Justice.
Especially because of the vulnerabilities,
Yes.
I mean, we've seen so many lives lost. We've seen so many South Africans leave the country, opting to leave the country because nothing is being done.
Right.
But Advocate, before we run out of time, I want to talk about asset recovery.
Yes.
I mean, we reported that in the 2023-2024, you recovered about 80 billion rand during that particular year. I mean, it is no small feat, I would imagine, but the road is long. I mean, there's a lot more that could be done. Talk to us about the biggest obstacles you face in accelerating asset recovery. I mean, one at the top of our minds, we think of these high-profile cases that we've been seeing, particularly one to mention, in terms of the state capture, the Guptas.
Yes.
How difficult is it to work with neighboring countries, to work with other countries, particularly that form part of the G20 presidency, to make sure that we recover these assets?
No, thank you very much for that question. So just to wrap up on the whistleblower protection, at the fourth meeting of the G20 anti-corruption working group, which is scheduled to take place in Mpumalanga here in South Africa, all the G20 countries will be here. We will have what we call a side event, right, on whistleblowing, and that is focusing on global improvements around whistleblower protection. So really we would like to acknowledge and assure the public that that matter is receiving extreme attention. Asset recovery is also, as I said, we actually spent quite some time on the high-level principles that we want to adopt as G20 countries at the end of the South African presidency. So part of that high-level principles, really looking at what has worked, what has not worked, right? So amongst others is that collaboration and cooperation by other jurisdictions, right? You've referred to the Guptas in your comment, and you know very well that we are really working very hard as a country, in particular the National Prosecuting Authority, of course working through the Department of Justice to ensure that the extradition process takes effect, right? There's a notice that has been issued by Interpol, and Interpol has got presence in all those countries in the G20 and probably even more. Now, we are looking forward to another enhanced level of Interpol, which is the silver level, which now really enhances the red level. We look forward that we should then really see traction in terms of cooperation of the other countries. You've mentioned the figures. What really nationally, what has tended to be the delay has been, to take matters through the courts, and we've been taking matters through the high courts, and you know that those who are allegedly guilty of corruption, they will do all they can, Unati, to really make sure that cases don't go through quickly. We are glad that the president really acknowledged and proclaimed the special tribunal. The figures that you are seeing there has been the contribution of the fast-paced special tribunal. Right now, before you close, I want to another important part. You mentioned prevention, right? Prevention is the area that we are looking at as an anti-corruption working group in South Africa. We have now even developed the National Corruption Risk Assessment and Prevention Framework. That is going to be inclusive of state and non-state parties. We would like this to be a whole of society.
I mean, we'd look forward to just tangible, declarations that will be made, particularly emanating from that fourth working group, so that we see some form of signature, around these matters when it comes to the Leaders Summit. But Advocate, that's all the time that we have, unfortunately. But thank you so much for your time. And one of the things, of course, that we have to speak about next time is corporate accountability measures that have to be taken, because that's where it all emanates from. But thank you so much, Advocate, for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
That was Advocate Andy Mutib, head of the Special Investigating Unit and chair of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. Well, this is a wrap from us. That's where we leave it for today. Of course, this segment will continue with focusing on some of the key issues around the G20 presidency, as we count down, of course, to the Leaders Summit in November. We'll be back with more news, particularly some of the news that are being focused on the various tracks that are under the G20 presidents. As you know, we have the Sherpa track as well as the finance track. We'll continue then to focus on all of those working groups that are also on the scenes. From us here, it's goodbye for now.